What we have here tonight is a story I'm going to tell you is about the Granite Mountain Speculator mine disaster of 1917, and it took place in Butte, Montana, which is probably the wildest, craziest place that's ever existed in our entire civilization. This turn of the century Butte, Montana. So in order to travel back into time here, we need to go back into an underground world that no longer exists. And there, 100 years ago, during a normal night shift, hell was unleashed and nearly 400 men were thrust into life and death situations. Their humanity was stripped to the core. They reacted with everything that humans can be, from blind animal panic to the most courageous self-sacrifice. So I invite you to come to early Butte to see and feel a world that's white hot and intensely human, and that's now buried by rock and time. So we'll start at the top of the Butte Hill. So this is the Granite Mountain head frame, which still exists at the top of the Butte Hill. I strongly recommend, especially after you hear this story, if you ever find yourself in Butte, go all the way up Main Street to the Lexington head frame. You cannot miss it, and turn right. It's called Bernie's Way. There's a little granite memorial sign there, and go all the way across the hill, and this is pretty much the view that you will see of the Granite Mountain head frame as it looks today. It's nearly buried by rock waste from the Berkeley pit. In the valley behind it, right back here, is filled with a dam. This is a dam. It's filled with 1,000 feet of rock waste from the Berkeley and Continental pits. It used to be an entire valley. So let's remove the rock and the years. We'll reverse the time. And let's let the men of the past become alive again. You'll see the mine yard come into existence as it was in 1917. Now, underneath all that rock and all those years was what was the biggest mine in the world in 1917. 1,200 men worked there. It dwarfed all the other mines. It was the most successful copper mine in history, and it was about to be known as the biggest hard rock disaster in U.S. history. How did it get to this? To answer that, we really need to go back a few more decades to the start of the whole show. We've all heard the stories of early Montana, the gold rush in the early 1860s to Bannock, Virginia City, and Last Chance Gulch. It was really after the California gold rush, and everybody took off all across the western United States looking for the next big strike. Thousands of prospectors fanned out across Montana territory, and a few of them found the Summit Valley, which is where Butte is now. And it's right up against the Continental Divide and one of the most unlikely places ever. And so there they gazed at the silver bows of the creek that was reflected in the sun, curling and winding across the valley, and they called it Silver Bow. That's why it's Silver Bow County. They panned for gold, and they shoveled the sand and gravel of Silver Bow Creek into their rocker boxes. They poured their strength into their shovels, and for a few, the energy they put in equaled the gold they took out. But for most, that was the exception, because most of them squandered their life energy into barren piles of rock. The gold played out very quickly in Silver Bow Creek and ran out in the gulches equally fast. Now, lore has it that up on the North Hill, some early travelers came across a small trench dug into a quartz vein, and beside it was a worn and chipped antler. Now, some unknown man had tried to dig into the rock there, prying pieces loose, probably enticed by the glittering crystals. They're gold, of course. They're gold. Look at them. They're glittering. Iron pyrite, fool's gold, iron sulfide. What the man didn't realize was that underneath him were mineral veins running more than a mile deep that had held more riches than any antler could ever reach. To understand the Butte Hill, you have to know the minerals of the deep earth. A granite batholith formed the 80 miles of the mountains along the Continental Divide from Butte up to Helena. Molten granitic rock welled up from inside, coming all the way to the surface, and as it rose, it cooled, and huge cracks appeared. Below it was a giant reservoir of high-pressure molten quartz filled with all kinds of metals. And that strange primordial geological fluid then injected up into the cracks for thousands upon thousands of feet. And over time, it cooled into the veins and bodies of ore that contained gold, silver, lead, zinc, and the richest copper deposit that had ever been found in the world. So these are not gold nuggets. They have complex copper sulfides. They're called energite, chalcopyrite, covellite, bornite. Those are the geological names. But peacock copper is what the miners called it, because after a blast in a rich vein, every color of the rainbow was seen in the glittering candlelight on the crystals. But to get to those deep minerals required going from placer mining, rocker boxes, panning for gold, to hard rock mining deep underground through the granite. And that demanded heavy industry in the middle of the Montana wilderness. So thousands of feet of heavy steel cable and steel ore cars, steam hoist engines, railroads, thick steel beams, giant air compressors and lumber mills, smokestacks, crushing mills and roasters and blast furnaces and complex smelters. Look at the guys here. How would you like to work 6 feet away from a giant splashing cauldron of 2,000-degree molten slag? By the late 1870s, there were about 150 mines operating in Butte. They went about several hundred feet down. This is the Black Rock mine. They were mostly mining silver, but some were mining copper for roofs, for plumbing, and for the new telegraph lines that were being strung across the country and across the Atlantic Ocean. But in a mere 2 or 3 years later, by the early 1880s, Edison had invented the light bulb, Bell the telephone, and some men saw the future. Suddenly the world wanted copper, and they found it in Butte. So we probably all know the copper kings of Montana: Marcus Daly, William Clark, Fritz Augustus Heinze. These are 3 of the richest men in the world at that time, and they all lived in Butte. They made their giant fortunes mostly from copper. And in this period, from 1880s and 1890s, the US by itself went from almost no copper production to creating and mining 60% of all the copper in the world. Butte produced almost half of that. The copper from Butte was gobbled up in a tidal wave of new inventions, all kinds of electrical things, everything electrical. It was used in the wiring and the lights and the telephone systems, in the factories and the trolley cars and the motors, everything electrical. There was an explosion of new inventions that completely changed everybody's life. And here in Kalispell, far cry from Butte, and really across the United States, any building that was built before 1975 has Butte in it. And for reclamation and recycling and stuff, probably most of the rest of the buildings up to the present have some of Butte in them. It's in the walls, it's in the wiring. It's what allows you light, it's what allows your computer to work. So probably more so than any other single place in the US, Butte catapulted our country from a rural agrarian society into an industrial world power. It was ground zero for the creation of the modern world because it was ground zero for copper. Okay, Butte quickly became Montana's powerhouse, a place where a man from any country could get a job. And the mine jobs were the best paying in the world and the most dangerous. Why would men come to the middle of the Montana wilderness to get a job? Well, consider Ireland. Butte became the most Irish city in the world outside of Ireland. Almost a third of the people at one point were Irish. Why? Well, since the penal laws in the 1600s, the English had made it illegal for the Irish to own any land at all. Most were tenant farmers or laborers. They could be evicted for any reason at all or no reason at all by their landlords, just thrown out into the street, into the mud, and tough luck. So hundreds of thousands of them were. During and after the famines from the mid-1840s up to the 1870s, 1/3 of the Irish population died. All you folks over there, sorry about it. 1/3 stayed and 1/3 left. Where did they go? Well, they went to places like Butte. The people who stayed lived in communal workhouses, infested with cholera, dysentery, doing simple labor like building roads. And what were they paid? 8 pennies a day. They had no future in Ireland. And in times like those, who would not gamble? Who would not strike out to a place like Butte, throw the dice, and try for a better life for themselves and their family? And so they did come. They came to the New World by the millions. And they came to Butte by the tens of thousands. Okay, and not just the Irish. Butte was a polyglot of more than 40 different ethnic groups. Every single country in Europe is represented there, plus people from Mexico, from Syria, Korea, Lebanon, China, Japan, and many others. Unbelievable, these people in the middle of the Montana wilderness created this gigantic metropolis. So men poured into the city from all over the world. Population went from that gold rush of about maybe 300 or 400 people after it exploded up to maybe 3,000 or 4,000. It went down to maybe 200 or 300. And very quickly then, when the hard rock mining began, in little less than 3 decades, it went from maybe 400 or 500 people to over 100,000. These are men seeking a new life, and they're willing to take risks. Look at their faces. These are the men that built the modern world. This is part of a shift that's about to go down in the Speculator in 1911. There's great stories too. You know, there's so many stories from Butte, it's almost impossible to get your arms around the crazy wildness of the place, the humanity of the place. But there are little ones like this that really in microcosm say everything. So there's a mother, an Irish mother, who's saying goodbye to her young daughter, Lizzie, on the docks at Cork Harbor. She said, "Lizzie, when you get to the New World, don't stop in America. You go straight to Butte, Montana." So, and I love that statement, right? It tells you that for those people at that time, Butte was its own destiny. You could buy a ticket from any big city in Europe with Atlantic Passage that included a railroad ticket from wherever you landed to Butte, Montana. So very quickly, over a couple of decades, by 1906, the Copper Kings were out and the Anaconda Company was in. This is just a newspaper saying that Heinze is selling his Butte copper properties actually to what effectively was the Board of Standard Oil, amalgamated, soon to become Anaconda. They gave him an offer he couldn't refuse after fighting them off. The entire might of the most ruthless corporation in the world fought him off for 8 years, and then he sold. All across the hill, ownership was changing, and into that upheaval stepped a new company, the North Butte Mining Company, run by a small group of very smart out-of-state investors. This is the Speculator Mine here. The North Butte bought the Speculator Mine first. It was one of the smallest claims on the hill, and the Spec was known for good ore, but loose ground, hard to make a shaft keep working there, bad air and hot conditions. The company, though, then strategically acquired a whole set of claims on the top of the hill and down the east side, and all of them were small, very undeveloped, and independently owned. All these different claims. And what were they doing there? Go ahead. So, if you drive by Butte, you'd be down on the interstate down here. Okay, when you look up, you're on the interstate, you look up at Butte, you see this hill, you see this gigantic pit, you see the Continental Pit, but up on the hill, there's one head frame that looks like it's right on the pinnacle, right on the very top. That's the diamond. The diamond claim is right there. And so you're looking up this way. That's the top of the hill. The Speculator's just a little bit out of sight. If you know where to look, you can see it. But all these claims here were bought. Why were they bought? North Butte had this plan. They had the best geologists, they had the best mining engineers, they had the best everybody. They had a plan. Go ahead. They were going to make two mines here, the Granite Mountain, the Speculator, and run crosscuts, run at every single level, 200 feet at a time, all across their entire claims there. Why were they doing that? Next slide. Because when they ran those across, they had figured out, the geologists had figured out how to access every single major mine, every single major vein on the top of the hill. What they did was they did these two shafts. They used a couple more for ventilation, and they made this gigantic mine out of 20 or 25 smaller claims. They then created this giant highway system to take and run up all that ore to the surface. That's the three-dimensional rough structure of this. They had this plan. It was basically an Apollo project for mining. They did not think small. They did this 30 years before anybody else thought of such a thing, including the Anaconda Company. So in order to make that work, they enlarged the speculator shaft and they built it up, they sunk it further, and then they sunk a couple of years later in 1909 the Granite Mountain shaft. And they made it this special, state-of-the-art in every single way possible. This was going to be the in and out of everything that went into the mine and everything, all the ore that came out. To put that full plan into action required this thing be made into something that no other mine had ever made. They need to lift thousands of tons of ore from all those different veins. They would need huge numbers of men to be working underground. They designed and built to lift and to lower the men and the equipment and to lift out the ore. They designed and built the biggest, most powerful hoist in the world. It was one of the first electric hoists, and it was probably maybe 100 times as powerful as any other hoist ever built. It was so powerful they could lift almost any amount of ore as fast as they wanted with no downtime. It was designed to take a 10-ton steel skip, which is basically a big metal container that they'll fill with ore. 10-ton skip loaded with 10 tons of ore, and then 10 tons of steel cable, which came from the hoist house all the way up the idler towers, over the shiv wheels and straight down 4,000 feet, 3,500 feet. You couldn't, in this scale, you'd have to be at least 4 stories down in order to be able to see where they were going. And it could take that 30-ton load, this hoist could take that 30-ton load and crank it up from a dead stop to 40 miles an hour in a few seconds. It had nearly infinite starting horsepower. It could lift more ore faster than any 5 of the other biggest mines on the hill, all combined. So this is 1915 when they did this. It was all new electrical technology designed from scratch. It was run by electricity from the new power lines that came in 1912. From the new dams, here the first one was from the Madison. And then it came from the Missouri dams, the Hauser and Canyon Ferry. But the key to the power of this hoist, the huge power, the acceleration, was provided by an 80-ton steel flywheel. It was 18 inches thick and 12 feet across, and it rotated at 250 miles an hour. It drove the acceleration of these huge loads from dead stops up to over 40 miles an hour. Okay, that flywheel was spun at 500 RPM. So it had enough kinetic energy in it that if you took it just into one big blast, it would take a loaded dump truck, one of these huge ones, it's probably the size of this section of the room, and shoot it 15,000 feet in the air and 6 miles over the top of the Continental Divide. I saw a Prius out here, right out the door here. It's the same kind of flywheel that's in that Prius, except their flywheel would put that Prius in orbit. So gigantic power in this. Then they designed an electrical system, a control system, so that an experienced hoist engineer could put any load, like a 10-ton skip, right? And all that 3,000 feet of cable, or 4 stacked cages with 35 guys in them. And he could take the floor of that and put it within a half inch, 3,000 feet under the ground. Never had humans wielded such power with such skill and precision. By 1917, North Butte Company had sunk the Granite Mountain shaft 3,700 feet down. That's 3/4 of a mile down under the ground. They went from bad air to the best ventilated mine. They went from 70 guys working over 1,200 and 3 shifts a day. They went from the smallest mine on the hill to the biggest, deepest, most developed, and most productive mine in the world. The U.S. entered World War I in 1917, and production ramped. The world needed copper. It needed to light our cities, to run our factories, to work our telephones, and to make every single bullet shell in war. It was said that there was an ounce of Butte copper in every shot fired by the Allies in World War I. What kind of guy worked there? This is J.D. Moore. He was a shift boss on the 2200 level at the Edith May vein, which is the farthest west in the mine. He worked daily a half mile underground. Now, shift bosses, they're like contractors, basically. They're kind of jacks of all trades. They knew how to use every kind of tool and do every job. And they knew how rock, dynamite, and men worked. And their job was to tell 30 or 40 hard men what to do in some of the most dangerous jobs in the world. They were persuasive with words if they needed to be, or with their fists if required. They showed by example, and the flip side of all that was that underground loyalty was made by the bond between the shared dangers that all of them had. And everybody watched out for everybody else. This is where Moore worked. It's called his beat, right? And so what you have is two levels here. This is one level. This is the 2000 level here, and then there's the 2200 level below it. And so the mine's set up like layer cake. There's levels, in this case, every 200 feet. Sometimes they're only 100 feet, but here it's 200 feet. And so what they're doing is Moore's going through all of this, and there's guys working at every single one of those floors. There's 28 floors in between the two levels. And there's 10 levels like this above, and there's 7 more levels like this below. There's 1,200 guys working there, and there's a whole bunch of shift bosses doing exactly what J.D. Moore's doing. And he's going through making sure there's a specific plan for every part of every one of these floors there, what people are doing. They're building up and blasting and dropping the ore down to the next lower level. You never lift ore except to get it in the wheelbarrow, and then you dump it down to the next level, and it goes into the ore carts on these loading ramps, and then it's taken back to the main station, and that's the only time it's lifted ever by the state-of-the-art hoist. Okay, so these are called stopes, and inside a stope, this is what it looks like. It's all timbered up because they've hollowed out the ore, so the timber's in there to hold up the ground because there's an immense amount of pressure on it. Okay, so this is square set timbering, so-called. It's used to brace these open places where the ore has been taken out. And the men will lay three-inch chute planks here as they drill into the vein that's going sideways there, blast it out, and then dump down the open chutes to the levels below. Okay, they work along each floor, and when they're done with the floor, they drill up, and then they go sideways again, dropping everything down. So when they mined out one floor, they went up to the next. So one thing, though, overall, that you need to keep in mind in all this, and all this action at all these different levels, okay, thousands of feet below the surface, all mining was done by candle or carbide lantern. All miners did their work in a few square feet of light lit by an open flame. On Friday, June 8th, Manager Norman Braley had his men lowering a 1,200-foot electrical cable to complete a new fire prevention system. Again, totally state-of-the-art, sprinklers, independent pumps, independent water tanks, all the way up and down the shaft. All they needed to do was connect it into the existing electrical system, hence this high voltage line. Fires destroyed mines. The timbers in the shaft, if they catch on fire, creates bonfires 1,000, 200, 2,000 feet up and down. They can burn up the shaft, and they're almost impossible to put out. This is what basically they look like. This was about 2 inches thick, right? 1,200 feet long, had high voltage copper wires in it. And the insulation was this flammable cambric. It's a fabric that's oil soaked and incredibly flammable. The standard design that Westinghouse created. Why did they do that? Well, in the hundreds and hundreds of experiments that they did, this was the thing that dissipated heat from the high voltage current, or from the high current, the best. And they never had a problem with the flammability. It was encased in a lead sheath. It was an armored cable. Okay, so on Friday morning, there's a group of electricians and rope men that started lowering the cable down the shaft. They tied on the electric cable with hemp ropes about every 5 or 10 feet to keep it by friction, so it wouldn't slip for all 1,200 feet of it. For 12 hours, the electricians guided the cable down. They were pushing it to an area deep in the mine. So they're starting up here at the surface, and they're coming all the way down here to the 2,600 foot level. That 1,200 feet is about this big, so they're letting it down, letting it down, letting it down. They get down here to the 2,600, and the electrician looks up and he goes, well, damn. The high voltage cable has come loose, is twisted around the steel cable, so they can't just undo it and just pull it in. He's got to untwist it. So he goes up, he rings the hoist engineer with bells. It's the only way that they communicate. There's no phones there that you can call and say, hey, Charlie, I need to go up slowly to untie these hemp ropes. No. He rings bells, ding, 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 ding. He's up for one, ding. He wants to go up. Hoist engineer starts taking him up. So he's untying the hemp ropes. He gets about 100 feet up. He's untied maybe 10, maybe 20 knots. And he looks very closely as he unties the last one. And the cable starts slipping right in front of his face. The electrician's looking at that. You can imagine the instantaneously, this gigantic heavy thing is suddenly slipping. There's nothing he can do to stop it. He rings a hoist engineer, ding, ding, 2 bells for down. But it's not just going ding, ding, sort of leisurely, it's ding, 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 faster and faster. And the guy's lowering down, he's going faster and faster. Meanwhile, the cable's falling right in front of his face. It's wrapping around the sprinkler heads, it's wrapping around the brackets, it's falling across the timbers, it's engaged itself, it's starting to tear everything out. And as he's going down, he gets down to the station and leaps into the back, and everybody dives as the cable just completely collapses and rips everything out of the shaft behind him. Rips everything loose. The lead sheathing is ripped off. There's insulation everywhere in the shaft. And finally, it jams in a dense tangle. For 500 feet above, all the water lines are broken. There's no water down there. They have to stop the drilling below because you can't drill without water. There's way too much dust. Kills the guys with emphysema, white lung. So the cable's blocking the shaft. They have to shut the whole thing down. The electricians look at it for a while. The people up on the top have no idea what's going on. The electricians look at the cable and go, oh my God, there's nothing we can do. They assess the damage and then they get hoisted to the surface. And they find the night foreman, Ernest Solo. Solo had worked at Speculator for 15 years doing every single job and working his way up from a mucker with a shovel to being the night foreman in charge of the entire mine. And now in the middle of the night, he was faced with a problem that nobody else had ever dealt with. What does he do? He listens to the electricians and he writes a little note to the mine manager, Norman Braley. He says, Norman, cable fell, block and shaft below 2400, going down to pull it out. I'll get the water pipes working and the drill's back on. Totally matter of fact. Nobody's ever dealt with this, but it's like, I'm gonna fix it. That's the nature of this era. So Solo took a shift boss, John Collins, whose men had to be pulled up because they were drilling down below, and now they couldn't drill because there's no water. And so Collins goes with him with a couple other guys, and they go all the way down to the 2,400 foot level. Now he and Collins go down another 50 feet to the start of the cable. So Collins says, well, we was looking for the end of the cable. We wanted to get a hitch on it and a chain. They were gonna pull the cable up, clear up the shaft, and get everything working again. The problem is, though, that shredded insulation lay everywhere around them. They squeezed out of the cage and onto the mine timbers. There's 4 compartments there made out of 12 by 12 timbers, right? There's 2 ore compartments, and then the compartment therein, which is about 5 by 5, and then the pump compartment where the cable is fallen and then over into theirs, right? And they're balancing there because if they fall into the cable, they'll fall, who knows, maybe 100 feet through this massive stuff and probably die. But if they lose their footing and fall the other way, they're going to go 1,000 feet, they're dead. So if they make any mistake, they're in serious, serious trouble. And so what are they doing? They're looking around. What kind of light do they have? Do they have a nice flashlight? No. They got carbide lanterns with acetylene flames coming up an inch out, 1,000 degrees. And where are they? They're in the midst of the world's largest fire hazard and a 2,400 foot high pile of kindling in the timbers above them. The inevitable happens. Solo brushes a little shredded tuft with his lamp and suddenly flames shoot up. He smashes it down with his big hands. Collins smashes it down. They think they're breathing hard, seem to have done, suddenly it fires up again. They can't do anything. Suddenly they're just engulfed with flames and they climb back into the cage and they ring and they go up to the 2,400 foot level. Everything's happening so fast, there's nothing they can do to reel it back in. They get up to the 2,400 station and they grab the only water they've got, which is a drinking keg, and they pour it down. Doesn't do a thing. The flames are exploding in the shaft. And suddenly, within a minute or two, they're already coming up and lapping into the station with smoke everywhere. So Collins gets in the state with 2 station tenders who are helping, and they jump on the cage and they ring and they go up. And they get up to the top man, who's the guy who's in charge of everything that goes in and out. His name is Joe Barnacote. And they're yelling, fire on the 24, fire on the 24. And then right there at the shaft collar, right at the surface, right where the shaft opens up, There's this huge argument between Collins and Barnacote, Conroy and Sheridan, because Conroy and Sheridan are the station tenders for the 2200. They work there. They let all the guys out. At the end of shift, they bring them all back to lift them up. They're the ones that put everybody and take them in and out of the cages and all the materials that come down as well. They know every guy. They know J.D. Moore. They know all the guys in his stope, all the guys that are working in his beat. And they know all the other guys there. And they'd be damned if they're going to stand up there when the fire's down there and let their guys burn. And so they shift over the skip to the cages, which is the set group for the guys who can get onto the cages because they can't get in a skip, and they go down. But below, the flames have already shot up 200 feet from where they started, and the two men dropped right into the top of the fire. After huge confusion, they were raised a few minutes later, engulfed in a pillar of flame. They were both embracing each other. And at that moment, everybody in the mine yard thought, my God, what's happening down there? 2,000 feet below, the shafts turned into a gigantic blowtorch. Okay, this is what a mine fire looks like above the ground. Down in the shaft, there's not enough oxygen for the timbers to burn completely. Some are a little wet from the groundwater, and the fire produces a thick black smoke that's filled with carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide is a special gas. It accumulates in your blood. It bonds with your hemoglobin and takes the place of oxygen. It seals the oxygen out, and so it suffocates you from the inside out. And it leaves your blood in your veins a bright cherry red. Even at low levels, carbon monoxide accumulates in your blood, gradually weakens you because you don't have any oxygen in your muscles. At higher levels, a person can be knocked unconscious in a few breaths and die. And so all that smoke filled with carbon monoxide poured into the tunnels and workings of the speculator mine. All the men were in their workplaces, spread over miles of tunnels. They had no idea what was going on. All the special ventilation equipment that pushed good air to them when they were working, guess what it did? When suddenly there's a fire right in the middle of where the ventilation takes place, it pushes all that poison gas right straight to them very fast. They have no idea what's going on. The shaft's blocked. They can't go up or down. Word can only travel sideways as fast as a man can run in the dark. Salau yells to the other. After Collins and Conroy and Sheridan went up, he's yelling at all the other ones, said, "We got to get the men out. We're going to get them out." So here's the granite shaft on the 2,400 foot level. Salau first runs. He runs down this long crosscut. So for distance here, this is about 600 feet right here. This is about 900 feet. Okay, you're running down a dead black tunnel with your carbide lantern. So see all these tunnels here, all this strange stuff, all these weird laterals and stuff, that's an indication of a vein because they're having to do all different kinds of tunneling in order to follow the vein and then to make it, as they hollow out the vein, to make it possible to actually get the ore out. And so there are men working all through there vertically, both above and below. Salau's running along here, he's following the pipes, and when a compressed air pipe goes up into a stope, he turns off the T-junction there and he slams his hammer on the pipe and he yells up into the stope saying, "Come on down, go to the high ore." The reason he has to do that is because the compressed air's on and the drills are going, nobody hears anything, even if they're this far away from somebody screaming at them. So you shut down all the drills, you shut down the compressed air, and you get the guys out. The problem is that the men didn't know where to go, and Salau knew that. He led two groups out. He led them both out here this way because the high ore is out this way. It's another big mine that's right adjacent to it. They can't get to this mine. There's no connecting. So he takes them all down. He takes several groups out, and each time he comes back for more. This is the kind of tunneling system that's there. It's a maze. How do you know where to go? There's guys working down right here in this little kind of floret. They can't get from here to here because it's 15 feet of solid rock. Where do they go? They come up here. Can they get from here to here? No, it's maybe 30 feet of solid rock. They keep going. They go up here. They have to go all the way up there. And then they come all the way back. And then they go this way. And guess what's right out there? The Granite Mountain shaft. They run straight at the fire and at the smoke. The speculator shaft is out here. So they're caught in this maze of tunnels, and Salau knows that. He knows that he has to go in again and again to help the guys who don't know where to go. Vertically, you have the same kind of problem because each one of those flat floors, it's branched in all those different ways, has only certain places where you can go up. And if you don't know where that place is, you're not getting up, because what happens? Maybe you start right here and you go, God damn, I made it. And then you guys keep going, you get up here 4 or 5 floors, and it stops. You go down and down, and you try to figure out where to go, you go, oh, I found another one. And then you go over here and you find, and you get up 3 floors and it stops. You know that game, Chutes and Ladders? You know, when I was a kid, played that, right? This is the kind of thing that made that game. Except this is Chutes and Ladders for life and death. It's not a game. One group found the 2600 station after going all through the maze of stuff led by one guy named George Falutovich. They come to the Granite Mountain Station, and they're on the 2600 foot level. The smoke hasn't come yet. But Falutovich says, we come to that station, and we see all that granite shaft on fire. And some of them men, they start to holler and cry and throw the hats, and they throw the coats off, and they fall on their knees and swear and pray and everything like that. The Granite Mountain shaft is a downcast. The air's coming down. Every mine has to breathe. The air comes in one place and gets pushed out and rises in another place. This is the downcast shaft. And first, you've got air coming from a June night from 6,500 feet. It's freezing, and it's coming straight down about 15 miles an hour, and it's fanning the flames on the 2,400 foot level. And it's capping them off. Have you ever tried to light a fire in a chimney in a cabin when the temperature is like 0? You've got to get the air going up the chimney in order for the fire and all the smoke to follow out and go out the chimney. Because if you don't, it's capped off by that heavier air, and the smoke just fills the cabin. And that's exactly what's going on here. So it comes down, caps off the smoke from the fire. The smoke goes pouring out as it builds down, as this fire goes down here and builds across, and it goes to the speculator, and then the speculator's a natural upcast, and it comes up. And it starts coming out of the speculator into the middle here. And the guys who are caught in the middle are screwed. Old Fetty, a miner on the 2200, said, we didn't know what the trouble was. He's right in this section right in here. He said, smoke and gas went ahead of us, and we turned around. And then the smoke came down the raise behind us, and we were caught between 2 smokes. And the only thing we could do was go any place we could find. Interestingly enough, what's happening here is it looks at this schematic, and he's like, well, you know, you could just go here and just walk right across to here. Or, God, if you were over here, you could just walk right across to there. No, this is 3 layers. The 2,000 foot level, the 2,200 foot level is in black, and the 2,400 is again in light. This is what you're dealing with. The distance between the 2 shafts is all this stuff, right? No matter where you are, it's all the stuff in between. So what happened to those men like Old Fetty? So the black waves of smoke roll right over the top of them. And some of the men are aiming right toward the Granite Mountain shaft, and they just run right into the smoke. Others turn around, and they have to get down on hands and knees and put their noses on the railings and try to get the last little sip of oxygen. And as they crawl, and those that head to the Granite Mountain Station, they die. The ones that for some reason say, no, this can't be right, I can't go that way. Who knows how they made that decision? Except they're faced by this impossibility. They turn around, they crawl out. Men are trapped everywhere, big groups of them, small groups of them. And the men are desperate. There's 29 of them. They're arguing right there. Every escape has been cut off. And what are they doing? They're shouting frantically. And Manus Dugan, who's a nipper, he takes care of the tools to all the guys. He knows the layout of the mine. He listens to them until they start playing out. They're just sputtering. And then he says quietly, he says, listen to me, boys. You can suit yourself, try to get the Badger and try to get to the high ore. My advice is to bulkhead in. That's what I'm going to do, and I recommend you do the same. And what that meant, bulkheading, was to find a dead-end tunnel that still had clean air in it and create an airtight wall. Basically, to seal yourselves into a tomb and hope the air inside the chamber where you are lasts long enough for the gas out in the mine to clear before you suffocate. So Dugan led them into that dead-end drift that was right close by, the one that only he knew of. the 2471C. They gathered timbers and boards, lagging boards, tools, canvas fan piping for ventilation, and they carted it all back and they built a wall. They had to undress and rip their clothes apart, nail it to the wall, and then put every kind of dust and dirt in any crack to try to make it airtight. And they left one little opening on the side and they stuck the shirt in it so they could take it out and check the air outside. And they began, it was going to be a 38-hour wait against the deadly gas. On the other side, so they're way out over here. On the other side of the mine is where J.D. Moore is working. And the men are desperate there too. And at a particular level, it's 200 feet higher from where Dugan was. They're in an area with the worst gas. It came rolling in almost immediately. They got trapped back there. Actually, Moore was clear over here. A bunch of his men made it out here, but he knew that he had a group working here. And what did he do? Did he go out? No. He ran back right through the smoke because he knew that these guys had no chance whatsoever unless he could help them. And then they went down to this level. They were 200 feet higher, and they climbed down to this level, hoping that they could run to the speculator shaft. But the gas had already come in and completely shut off this area. And he inhaled badly lung damaged. He inhaled the smoke. It was badly lung damaged. So, and then he had to deal with the situation where the men want to struggle. They want to try to make it to the speculator shaft, and he knows they'll die if they go. And so he grabs them, he slams against the wall. He won't let them go. He barks out orders and says, "We're going to head back here." Where are they going? These guys don't even know that. Imagine. These guys are frantic with fear. They think they're staring at death. And they're going to run back into no man's land where there's nothing? It seems as if you're committing suicide, but it was the one way that Moore knew that they might survive. And so they went all the way out this long crosscut to the very end where he knew there was a drill and a bunch of equipment. They went out there with the gas chasing them the whole way and then started building the bulkhead. It was absolutely frantic right from the get-go and to the end where they took the hose off the drill, a compressed air hose, opened it up. Moore jumped and just jammed it in one guy's hand and said, "Keep back the gas." And so he's spraying in a tunnel. The tunnel's 7 feet high, it's about 7 feet wide, and he's trying to spray and keep the pressure even to keep the gas back. And every time he moves it, the gas is moving in. It's every place, and so all he's trying to do is just keep it just as even as possible as the gas pushes him farther and farther back until his back's against the bulkhead that they're building. Totally frantic as they smack. You imagine in the middle, 2,200 feet underground, this is incredible epic, trying to create a wall to seal themselves into their own tomb. At the very end of that, when they have it almost ready, Ulysses still he's got his back to the wall, and he's still trying to keep the gas back, and it's coming all around him. And they leave a little hole. He crawls through. They put the pressurized compressed air against that hole, and they have him stripped down because they've run out of canvas piping, and they hammer the lagging boards in and then plaster his clothes on there, nail them all in, plaster it with mud. Moore turns off the hose and he looks around and goes, "Good work, boys." You can imagine the scene. They're all naked, sitting there, heaving with wild eyes. They go, "We're safe, at least for now." See, up on the surface is total chaos. Nobody knows what's going on. The smoke's pouring out of both shafts. A group of speculator men were popping out of nearby mines from all the mines around that. Nobody knows who's up and who's down, who's alive and who's dead. By 2 a.m., small teams of rescuers have appeared from every single mine around there to try to help. They wore these primitive rebreathers. They have an oxygen tank on the back and a pouch here with a CO2 scrubber on the front. They weigh about 45 or 50 pounds. They're the forerunners of rebreathers and the fire equipment that's now used. Draeger apparatus. Draeger is still a company that builds this. So some of them look like this. But remember, at low levels, carbon monoxide will make people dizzy. It'll make them tired. It'll also distort their perceptions. They'll get paranoid. They'll have hallucinations. Some of the guys look like this. Now imagine being a miner hallucinating from carbon monoxide poisoning and seeing this thing coming out of the smoke toward you. Is it a rescuer or is it a demon come to steal your soul? One problem with one valve, and these rescuers are dead. Manager Braley started shooting water down the shaft early Saturday morning. When it hit the fire, superheated rock exploded. The shaft collapsed for almost 1,000 feet. It sealed in this thick, poisonous moisture, a mixture of steam, gas, and smoke, just this deadly murk. And even so, there's more than 100 guys put on their rebreathers and went in to try to help the miners that they knew were down there. They did find 2 live ones who had somehow survived on that 600-foot level. But mostly, they found the bodies of men mowed down by the poison gas. And you can imagine the grimness of the mood. The mine was too huge. Nobody knew that somewhere in that mine, somewhere far down in the rock, down the mazes of tunnels and thousands of feet of poison gas, there were men living and using up their oxygen. Behind Moore's bulkhead on the 2400, they periodically pulled out the shirt on the wall and smelled for any let-up of gas. They hit the pipes, because if any rescuers were out there, they would hear the echo for thousands of feet. But after 24 hours, the air behind Dugan's bulkhead got bad. The lamps went out. The men were writhing on the floor in pitch blackness. Dugan wrote notes to his wife, Madge, who was 8 months pregnant. Sunday, 1 a.m., I realized that all oxygen has been consumed. Everybody's breathing heavily. If death comes, it'll be caused by all the oxygen used from the air in the chamber. Dugan. Another man wrote, there's no water to drink, nothing to eat, foul air, the carbide lanterns and the candles don't light. My matches won't light, and they're good matches. Men are getting desperate. They want to burn up the bulkhead and commit suicide. They can't stand the suffering. We've rapped on the pipe and made there's someone coming to give people hope, give our men hope. We rapped 1,000,000 times. It's all fake. No one will ever show. The newspaper headlines Sunday morning said it all. The men missing, there's dead, it's death. And they're just beginning to realize the scale of the disaster. On the other side of the mine, 200 feet higher, is J.D. Moore and his men. There's 10 of them total. First thing Moore did after they got the bulkhead up is he took his watch. It was given to him by his father, and he broke the glass on the thing in anticipation that all their lights were going to go out so he could feel what time it was. He breathed heavy smoke. His lungs were damaged. He was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, but he kept his men optimistic. He joked with them, and he helped them. He wrote to his wife, "Dear pet, this may be the last message you'll get from me. The gas broke at about 11:15. I tried to get the men out, but the smoke was too strong. I got some of the boys with me in a drift we put in a bulkhead." His letters to his wife quickly said something much different than the jokes. The air went bad fast because the gas had followed them into the chamber. At 5 a.m. he wrote again, "Dear pet, there's a young fellow here, Clarence Marthe. He has a wife and 2 kiddies. Tell her we did the best we could, but the cards were against us." By 7 a.m., he writes, "Dear pet, we're all waiting for the end. I guess it won't be long. We take turns rapping on the pipe. If the rescue crew is around, they'll hear us. Try not to worry. I know you will, but trust in God. Everything will come out right. We will meet again. With love to my pet, and may God take care of you. Your loving Jim." Behind the bulkhead, all the air and all the air was getting, all of its oxygen was being used up. The lamps and the candles both went out, and blackness, pure blackness, filled the chamber. But yet, Moore still rose up from the haze of that gas poisoning. He roused himself. He talked with the men. He rapped on the pipe. He crawled from man to man with the water, with a small wooden keg, tipping it to give them a drink, wetting their lips. But as the hours ebbed from Saturday into Sunday and then into the early hours of Monday, they were asleep or comatose most of the time. And inside each of them, as the oxygen failed, that fine architecture of life and the heart itself began to misfire and weaken and slowly begin to fail. In Dugan's bulkhead, twice there were mutinies. This shows you where relative they were. Here's the shaft, here's the shaft. If you're at the memorial, you're standing up here looking down. On the 2,400-foot level, here's where Dugan is. They're out this far, they'd have to come here, then down this to get to the station, the Granite Mountain. They'd have to go out here and go all the way down here to get to the speculator station. 200 feet higher up, here's where Moore is, all the way out here. Dugan talked down both of those mutinies, had a calm, steady voice, and he appealed to them. He convinced them, if you can imagine. And after a day and a half on Sunday near noon, Dugan pulled out the shirt and realized that air had begun to clear in the tunnel outside. And he whispered to the men sitting near him in the dark, "Are you ready to take the gambler's chance? Now's the time." As they broke down the bulkheads, they tore off the boards and the new air flooded in. The other men woke up from the thick blurred dreams of the dead. Stirred, they groaned. The air had come, that they were breathing, the air had come from the June morning far above. From a world with a sun, a world with light. Coming thousands of feet down the shafts into the working, pushing out the poison gas and smoke, and the men could smell that life and it gave them hope. They were hungry for it. And as the cool freshness washed over them, one man took a deep breath and said, "My God, air." So in the dark, Dugan was in the lead. He came out here. He knew where to go. He was the only guy that knew where to go. None of these guys were familiar with this part of the mine. And he walked in the dark all the way down. It's about 1,500 feet to the speculator station. Once he gets to the station, you have to realize, pitch black. You come up to the station. There's the shaft. It's 1,000 feet of a hole. You can also fall into the ore pockets, which are about 35 or 40 feet down. You'd break both legs in the dark, someplace down in the ore pocket. And he knew, or he thought, that the gas would come at any time. He was in a hurry. He was trying to save his men. He got to the station. He felt all around. He felt the edge of the shaft, and he knew. And he started up on the timbers on the sides and on the insides. He's looking for the pull cord to ring the bells to the hoist engineer, because there's no other way to tell the people on the surface where you are. And he didn't find it. There was no pull cord. He knew that the speculator shaft was being retimbered. He didn't expect to find the cord. And so he quickly looked for it. He didn't find it, and he turned around, and he did the next best thing in his mind, which was to go all the way out here past where their bulkhead was, and out this way, past one ventilation shaft, into this place, the 2439C manway, where he was going to climb 400 feet and then go out to what's called the Rainbow. It was another ventilation shaft, and he knew there was always an engineer there, always, for hoisting. And that's where he was headed. It was a good decision. It was the main ventilation pathway. The other men behind Dugan came back to the station, and they had no idea where to go from there. They did the same thing. They were crawling because they didn't know where the shaft was. They felt for the pull cord, and they couldn't find it. One of them was a rope man, though, a guy who hangs these cords and deals with the hoists. And he said, "Lean into the shaft. Maybe it's been hung. Maybe it's just not set into the housing." So two guys grabbed the other guy's arm. And you can imagine, there's 1,000 feet of air below him, pure blackness, and he leans in as they hold him. And he's feeling around inside, and he can't feel anything. And then he reaches out, and he puts his hand across the center of the shaft, and it brushes something. Brushes it again, he grabs it. It's the pull cord. It's been hung an hour before by the guys from upstairs. They just haven't gotten to this level. And they take it out, and they're so careful with it. They don't want anything to happen to it. And they sit there, and they do two things. One is they pull 9 times the universal sign for danger. They count every single one carefully, because our minds are so muddled from spending all that time, almost 2 days, with almost no oxygen. They count out the 9, and then they ring 6 and 4, which is their level at 2,400. On the surface, the hoist engineer is listening in surprise. His entire day has been putting rescuers all over in the upper levels there above the 2,400. He knows there's nobody on the 2,400. When that first bell rings, he starts counting. It's completely instinctual. So it's a language. And he counts up 9. It was danger. And his ears are perked. He's all in. Where are these guys? And then he hears 6 and 4. He's going to 24. There's nobody on the 2,400. And then it rings again. 9 bells. He counts them out. 6 and 4, and then he realizes men alive on the 2,400. Rescuers went down. They found a group of naked men lying by the shaft, bodies scraped, smeared with blood and mud, blinking at the first light they'd seen. At the surface, as the rescued men came up, the crowd rejoiced. They cheered and then hugged each other, slapping backs and crying out, "It's a miracle, it's a miracle." 25 men alive. And then they realized that Dugan wasn't there. The man who had saved them had disappeared. He'd saved 25 of them, and now he was missing. Albert Cobb was one of them. He was a motorman. He was right there when the fire started. He ended up with Dugan. He came up blinking the light. He's sort of a jokester. Right? He joked on the outside. He was overwhelmed with relief and desperate to see his wife, who, just like Dugan's wife, is pregnant with their first child. He peels himself away and he runs all the way down the hill, between the mines, past the mountain con, down into North Wyoming. His house still exists. It's this tiny, tiny little house. And he reaches the yard, the tiny yard, which is just packed in with all the other little houses there. And their dog starts barking in this tiny front yard. His hair standing on end because he doesn't recognize Cobb. Cobb's reeking from the bulkhead. And he speaks to it and he commands it and he says, and he orders the dog to stop, and the dog won't let him in. Barking and barking, and the wife comes out and she yells, "Albert," when she sees him. The neighbors step on the street, and still, there's Cobb. He smells of this horrendous odor from the bulkhead, the smoke and the putrid air, and the dog would not let him pass. His wife tore into the house in a frenzy, grabbed a shirt and a pair of trousers, threw them over the fence, and he shed his filthy clothes and put his shirt on inside out, put his pants on. He opened the gate, and the dog jumped for joy, and his wife flung himself on him. And she said, "I knew it would end like this. I never quit." Dugan, nobody knew where Dugan had gone. Several of the men were with him. There were reports of him. He had been staggering. They didn't know what he was doing, but Cobb had heard him talk about going to the rainbow shaft. And so some of the rescuers immediately set off to try to find him, but there's still bad gas in different places, and with their big bulky equipment, they couldn't go in the stopes, they couldn't climb anywhere. So they searched and searched and couldn't find where he had gone. Dugan had to cross multiple tunnels. He had to do it completely in the dark. He had to go all the way out and across these different tunnels into this weird little area here that's like these funny little H's because the vein has faulted, this big fault line, this blue. And he has to cross here, he has to go here, he has to go like here, he has to cross another one. There's a manway right up there, right next to the sea. It's not marked on this geological map, but it's there. It's a great choice. It's the main ventilation path. It should have been clear gas, but it wasn't. 3 days later, they found his body 120 feet up, slumped against the ladder. He was identified by the notes in his pocket to his wife. "To my wife and mother, it breaks my heart to be taken from you so suddenly and unexpectedly. But think not of me, for if death comes, it'll be in a sleep without suffering. I ask for forgiveness from any pain or any suffering I've ever caused. Madge, dear, the house is for you and the child. Manus." On the other side of the mine, Moore's men languished. No one knew they were there. Tom Lamartine was one of the most experienced mine rescuers on the hill. He'd been a pipe man at the Speculator, and he was well-liked and a very smart guy, very canny detective of what happened and how to track people down. He was called to help. When he went down, he knew the layout of the mine. And he went right down first to where Moore's beat was. He came down the Speculator shaft, and he did this careful circle, noting every single thing he saw down here, not quite to the bulkhead. He turned around because the gas was so bad. He turned around and checked out all these different things, noting where men were and a few bodies. And it was very clear there's a huge amount of work going on there. Men had been working everywhere, but there were almost no bodies. People weren't accounted for, including J.D. Moore, and he couldn't figure out where had they gone. So he came all the way over here to the station, found a few more, came back, and then ran into a couple of guys and ended up being taken away to another place. He went every single time he was at any place in the mine. If they had a new exploratory going out, he was chosen because he knew the mine and everybody knew how good he was. A total level-headed guy. So the next day he goes down again. It bothers him. He reports this. He says, there's something going on here. I don't know what it is. Where are the men? He reports it, but nobody checks it out. The next day he goes in again. They retrieve some of the bodies in here. And then he makes a special trip out here and he goes all the way to the bulkhead, checking out everything, looking at this. There's been a scuffle here. There's been a scuffle there. There's boards that have been taken up. There's all these different clues. It's like a detective tale. He's trying to figure out what happened here. And he gets all the way out here, way out. It's like 400 or 500 feet on this long crosscut. And he's almost ready to turn around and he sees this bulkhead in his carbide lantern. He's going, what is that? And of course, we know the answers. It's like, oh, well, there they are. No. Bulkheads were put in all over the mines. They're literally maybe 100 or 120. And they're put in to redirect air, to channel the air one way or the other, even when men are working. So there's nothing peculiar about having a bulkhead back there. But there was something about this, about the placement, about the situation. But they hadn't found Dugan yet, and so it was almost unthinkable. Could there be men behind this? He even ran up to it and he hammered on it and yelled. No answer. Moore and his men were comatose at that time. They couldn't answer. So he goes back again, and he gives another report, says there's a strange bulkhead back there. It should be checked out. And immediately he gets taken down to the 2800 because people think that they hear hammering. And so he's off on another goose chase. That night, he sits in bed and he's trying to think, there's something about that. In the morning, he gets up. He leaves his helmet, all his safety apparatus. He leaves it at the station and he walks in by himself with nothing. He's listening, he's hearing, he's looking. He's trying to put it all together. He knows that there's something wrong. And he gets all the way out here and the pieces start fitting. And he starts realizing that they couldn't have gone out here. The motorman is right here, it was back here. They couldn't have gotten out this way. They must have gone back. And then he sees all the scuffling around, empty ore cars and full ore cars out here. And he's getting closer and closer and he reconstructs it in his mind. And by the time he gets to that bulkhead, he knows there are men behind that. But he's all by himself. He has no rescue equipment. There's still gas around. He's dizzy. He rushes back up and he finds Braley. Braley wants to dismiss him. No, there's nothing there. No, it was just built, no. And Lamartine convinces him, no, we're going to go down. We've got to go down. And this time, Lamartine goes down with an axe. And he's got Braley, he's got two other guys, and they go down there, and Braley's saying, no, this can't be. I'm sure that was just built somewhere. They get all the way to the end out here, and Lamartine's walking fast, and he's got that axe, and he gets up there, and he just chops and rips off a board. And from behind it, there's a voice that says, hello out there. Lamartine talks to the man. It's John Lissa. The voice is strong. He can hear him. Lissa tells him, he asks, who's in there with you? He says, Shifter Moore's in here, Clarence Marthe, Mark Sullivan, and me, John Lissa, and others, Nico Knudsen. He said, but there's gas out here. We gotta get a rescue team. Please hurry, he says, the air's bad. Lamartine stays as Braley and the others go up. They get a whole rescue team. Lamartine talks to him a little bit. The guy says, and tears off. He says, do you have a light? Do you have a light? Lamartine says, yes. And he tears off the top board. He says, please, can I see it? Can I see it? Lamartine shines it into the top, up on the ceiling, behind the bulkhead, behind this bulkhead. And the guy looks at it and he says, thank you. And then everything's quiet. Braley comes down, they rip down the whole thing, they take the men up. They try to get everybody up there, but Moore's men are so weak, they're dying as they're being rescued. Leslie's voice is so strong, but after 60 hours, they're so weak. These strong men, so fragile. They're literally to the point where there's no dividing line between life and death. It's like the fall here, right? You've been here during the winter, it freezes, fourth big hard frost, right? The leaves on the deciduous trees, the maples, the aspen, they all change the beautiful colors in the fall. And then there's one more freeze. Maybe the sun's out. And those leaves, they just effortlessly fall off the tree. There's no dividing line between life and death. And Moore's men were exactly like those leaves. The men were so close to death. They were just dropping away, even as they were talking to Lamartine, even as Lissa was speaking to him, even as he asked him to see his light. Lamartine saved 6 of the men, but 4 of them, including Moore and Lissa, died in the rescue. There's a limit to what men can endure. This is the next day's headline. You can see Lamartine down here. Sellout, in his dying words, took the blame for the fire. Those identified dead, those rescued alive. 168 men died, but 240 lived. This is what men do when they're thrust into life and death situations that strip them to the bone. It's right to the core. We see everything that people can be. And so this is not just a mining story, it's a story about the deepest part of the human spirit. It's a story about us, what we are, and what we can be. And the truth is that people will rise up no matter what the odds. They'll do what's needed. And the epitaph on Dugan's headstone is this: no greater love hath a man than to lay down his life for a friend. The greatest things we're capable of come from the greatest sacrifices. And I find that a profound beauty and inspiration within all this heartache and sadness. And it's as true today as it was then in the tunnels of the speculator, and it always will be. The story shows that when everything that sustains us is gone, the water, the light, even the air we need to breathe, that the darkness will still be lit by heroes. That's the story. From every story and every time travel, we have to come back into our world. We have to come from the past into the present. So take a look at these guys. It's a shift from the mountain con. Look at their faces. Butte is still filled with all the ghosts of these heroes. Thank you.